I am one of 7 nurses in the world who does helicopter rescue like we do. We do wilderness rescue, swift water and still water rescue, law assist, fire suppression, and then we also take care of critical care, transport patients, neonates, PDs, adult ECMO transport patients, those sorts of things. So it's a really wide array of the things that that happen, and to be a nurse and get to do that job is a pretty incredible one. So I'm really proud of our program. It's a government-funded program, so it's not for profit, and that makes it even better to work for. So I have a super cool uniform. That's me. I look like a stormtrooper, and a relatively badass job. I mean, it's cool. But I am the authority on absolutely nothing. I have published 0 research. I read a lot of literature, but publish none. I don't have an advanced degree. I'm working on it. It's in the progress. But so why am I here, and what do I have to offer you? So nightmare is probably a little bit dramatic, but you're here, and now you're stuck in this room, and you're my captive audience for a little while to talk about a topic that typically is an eye roller. It's touchy-feely, it makes people uncomfortable, I don't have time for that, because you're go-getters, you're high-achieving medical professionals, and so this threatens your ego, and it can be a little bit confronting. So don't panic. I've been guilty of dropping an F-bomb or 2 in a lecture, but I promise it will never be feelings. Today we will not talk about feelings, so you can all unclench your jaws and loosen the sphincters that are tight and nervous. Take a deep breath. We're going to breathe. We're going to channel our inner version of calm, our open-minded version of you, and today we're going to talk about your brain. It's a pretty one, I think. We're going to talk about what happens when it gets stressed, when chemical reactions occur, when it compensates and protects you from the environment that's constantly around you, and how we recognize and manage that stress. Dave talked about a lecture that I gave last year in a pre-hospital conference with global HEMS leaders from around the world. So it was mostly men, so I had to title it something great to get their attention, right? So I called it Shoes, Sex, and Secrets. Usually if you throw sex in there, it works out okay. That lecture started, I thought it would just be a quick, a necessary evil, that it was a topic we had to talk about. As a result of that lecture, I am contacted for the last year almost weekly by someone or some program, some doc somewhere, some paramedic somewhere that's had an issue, that's had a problem, and is looking for resources for them or for their colleagues. The shoes in that lecture represented the boots that I've worn my entire career, which started in the Army. I was in boots the first time I experienced real fear. It was the kind of fear, it's the fight or flight reaction for the first time, the one where you forget how to breathe, where it takes your breath away. This was immediately following the care of my first trauma patient, 2 days on ground with the 101st Airborne Division, task forward with the infantry. So me and 122 11 Bravos. It remains etched in my memory, and all of the details are perfectly intact. But I love this picture because to me it shows the naive and desperate spirit. I was hopeful that if I cleaned up this blood, I could clean up that mess. I could clean up everything that just happened in the hour before, in the year that led up to this deployment. I could clean it all up in just this motion of cleaning up this blood. I can make this problem go away, and those towels would eliminate that loss. The sex part wasn't really about sex. The sex part was about gender and how I had different chromosomes than everybody else that was there. They allowed me to do this, to wash away both physically and emotionally, to cry and to diffuse and to debrief anger and frustration and fear and sadness without judgment, because I didn't have to suck it up and soldier on. It was okay for me. They called me mom. It was all right. I could cry and I could be sad. This wasn't afforded to my brothers. Let's go, guys. We have a mission. So secrets was what happened to those guys. They kept a lot of secrets. My pre-hospital family now does the same. Everyone suffers in silence, making every effort to dull the pain. And what happens when you start to dull pain or find a way to dull pain is that our relationships suffer. We suffer from addiction. We drink too much. So stress. There's a couple of kinds of stress. Today we're going to talk about acute and chronic stress. So acute stress, surely we know what that is. Fight or flight. They gave us to that so we could go and fight woolly mammoths in the beginning of time when Neanderthals were there. So acute stress, this is it right here. Disaster, train wreck, I just pretend, right? So nervous, excited, hypervigilant, a little tachycardic, I'm pretty sure, oh yeah, look at like 30 degrees of red. So that's an acute stress reaction. And it's a good thing because when it's done and it's over, you get to conquer it. Yes! So it feels good. Now suddenly acute stress can kind of be a little bit awesome and we get it a little confused with good euphoric sort of feelings. And then you want to do it again. I don't want to do it again, but just chronic stress, this is where we live in emergency medicine and critical care, primarily emergency medicine. Don't tell the critical care guys I said that. This is where we live. You live in a chronic stress environment. So I would argue that if you work in a large hospital system or a trauma center or in pre-hospital, that the moment you walk in the door, your stress begins. So it could be a code or a chest tube, or an airway, or the mountain of paperwork in the charting, or the angry family member, or the dying patient in palliative care. So when those levels of adrenaline and cortisol rise, they don't just vanish when you walk out the door. It takes a little while. So let's think about it. So let's just say you work 2 days, high stress environment. So we're not in fight or flight, acute stress, sweating, but it's there. It's sort of this baseline. And then we're off for a day, and it starts to your levels start to normalize, and you deplete a little bit, and you're getting a little bit closer to normal. But then the next day you're going to go back to work, and so those cortisol levels go up a little bit higher. So all the time, it's like you're running this low-grade fever permanently. It's not the big one, but it's just enough to make you a little bit different than everybody else. So this was frustrating for me last year when I learned about this, because I used to say, you're not genetically superior to people, and that was part of my justification. And then it turns out that when they start studying twins who come home from when one twin suffers from PTSD and the other doesn't, it turns out that there is some genetics involved, and so you're not genetically superior or inferior doesn't work anymore. So this was a particularly interesting paper to me, but they made it sound cooler than I could have. So none of that's probably news for you because I know you're really smart and everybody studies the brain and we all know what's going on. But what they just said really, really calmly is that my amygdala is fired up, so I'm extra nervous all the time. My hippocampus has been hijacked, so I'm forgetful and I lack impulse control. And I have a persistent release of cortisol, which is causing my prefrontal cortex to shrink, and I can't make a decision. That's what they just said, right? All those things are happening to me. It's possible today, really. But I'm thinking, no, not me. This cannot be the case because I keep it all together. I'm a helicopter nurse. I keep it all together. I give lectures on this stuff. I know what it is. I've read all the research in the literature. So there's no way that this is me. I know all the signs and symptoms. I do yoga. I exercise. I'm totally fine. So I'm going to show you what fine looked like at my house one evening. So I'm going to need Dave. You're going to come and drive. You're going to be my driver. My husband sitting here. And so I'm just going to run in and grab my purse, and I'll be right there, okay?
Whatever you say, huh?
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go right here. I get my purse, my keys. I forget all those things almost immediately. Okay. I'm ready.
Hi, honey.
Hi, hey.
I'm pretty excited about date night tonight.
Yeah.
Did you lock the door?
No, I did not lock the door. Okay, so I'm gonna come back over here. I'm gonna lock the door. I always have big shoes on, so now I'm already annoyed. Okay. All right, door's locked.
Great. Well, where do you want to go?
I don't I don't care.
Well, that sounds good. Do you want to go for dinner?
Honestly, I don't care.
Well, do you like Mexican or sushi?
I mean, seriously, so I say I don't care, and I don't understand why you cannot understand that I don't care. Like, just pick a freaking place. Like, this diatribe is ridiculous every single time we get in the car. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? I don't know. I mean, really, like, it's a Spanish Inquisition in here, and I don't understand. Just decide. You know what? Forget it. I'm done. Thank you. So, who is that? Who's experienced that or done that before? Every single time. So, that's what I have for that. What? That's usually how my husband ends up looking. What just happened here? Sitting in the car by himself. So I was forgetful. I was anxious. I was unable to make a simple decision because that day I had made lots of decisions for people in very, very critical environments. So I was tapped out in decisions and had decision fatigue. So I can't decide paper or plastic at the grocery store. I can't decide where I want to go for dinner. So the remedy to that, moving forward, so that's not every time, is to plan those things in advance. Now we know on date night where we're going for dinner. I know on date night what I'm going to wear before I even get home because it's planned out. It's a map. So that day can't exhaust me so much that I can't make it. Well, I don't have to make a decision, even if it does. So little tips in planning your lives a little better will make you happier and your spouse happier. So you're smart, but you're not a machine. I am smart, and I am not a machine. So your reactions to your environment are not always appropriate. This was not an appropriate reaction to my environment. He was trying really hard, right? Except he forgot to open my door for me, so that's rude. But he was trying really hard. So in what we do, I guess the point is that we deal with the hardest parts of life on a daily basis. I don't have to tell you what you do and why it's hard, because anyone in this room knows that. The day starts fast and furious, and it continues fast and furious, and there are people whose lives are depending on you. And it is normal to be exhausted from this. You just heard all the science. What happens? It's not because you're weak. It's not because you're a sissy. It's not because you can't take it. Our survival instincts are incredible, and they get us through that day, but then they need to dump at some point. Our physical and mental health pays a toll. So I'm really hesitant to say on the now what, let's care for our bodies, because hello, pot, I'm kettle. I'm a little high on the BMI scale, but for a big girl, I run and swim and do yoga and sound meditation and exercise. So those are things that have been proven study after study, particularly meditation and yoga, to eliminate or to reduce the chronically high cortisol levels that we experience. In terms of mental health, our most powerful tool is our voice, because there's such a powerful stigma associated with this. To say, I'm having a tough time. We have to be more aware of our colleagues, more aware of the nurses that we work with and paramedics that we work with, of what their experiences are, and dispel the myths and diffuse and debrief with our crews and colleagues. And we have to stop rationalizing. Dave was doing this last night. How are you? Oh, I'm good. I can't complain. Everything's fine. So maybe Dave really can't complain and everything is really great with him. But everybody does this. I can't complain. Even if you're really upset. Well, I have food on the table and I live in a first world country, and so we rationalize, and sometimes that's healthy and that's fine. Like, let's look on the bright side. We're blessed. But sometimes those things can be really dangerous. I have so much to be thankful for. Those are dangerous statements. They might be true, but they belittle the fact that this is a chemical reaction. It's as though you are choosing to be stressed, that you are choosing this I promised I wouldn't say feeling, dang it. If you use those to deny or ignore your reaction to stress, that's unfair. It hurts the people around you when they hear you do it. So we need to be more careful about that. Critical incidents are individual. I think this is the biggest misconception. So if you look up a critical incident on any sort of debriefing website or in the manuals, it talks about critical incidents in terms of normal people. So if you were all normal right now, a critical incident would be a mass casualty event. It would be a threat, a terror where you felt bodily harm and overwhelming fear. So that would be a critical incident to normal people. A critical incident to us is a little bit different because we see the horror of life all the time. And so while those are critical incidents, in our world we debrief mass casualty events. Well, a mass casualty event for me is a rollover in a vehicle of 6 people. I see that once a month. So that's normal for me. And so it doesn't become a critical incident. But what does become a critical incident is the little boy that looks just like my kid who's had an accident. That becomes my critical incident. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The things can be completely benign for us. It can be the person a paramedic on scene once of a vehicle fatality. The little boy had the same shoes as her little boy. It is what individual and what it is to you. So I hate for people to think, well, it wasn't that critical. It wasn't that serious. Whatever it was for you is what it is. So I told you about the F-bomb earlier. I'm not going to talk about feelings, and I'm not a huge fan of mandatory feelings. That means like sitting in a group and talking about feelings. I know this is going to be shocking for you, but when I was in the Army, every time we lost one of our comrades, they would put us all in a circle, and they pretty much may as well have said, let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, because nobody wanted to hear it, because an outsider came in and wanted to diffuse or debrief us in that situation. We weren't hearing it. So diffusion is a quick talk about what you tasted, touched, saw, smelled, felt in that environment, what your perception of a critical incident was and what it was for you. This is an awesome thing to do with your colleagues, and it's a lot like in aviation when we do an after action. I would encourage you to use this in the hospital because a quick diffusion of a situation can eliminate and dispel a lot of fears. A lot of times people feel guilt for something they could have, should have, would have done. We do that a lot. That's is a lot of our reasons for our angst. But the would have, could have, should have can be dispelled by someone else who has a different sort of tunnel vision than you do. Because in our critical incident, we get this tunnel vision and this auditory exclusion. So someone else can say, no, I saw you do that. No, you did a good job. Maybe you didn't do a good job, and here's why. But we can talk about those things together in a really quick and informal process, sticking to not feelings, but facts about what happened, how we felt about it, what it smelled like, what it looked like, what his injuries were. So later, if the diffusion isn't enough, and that's the time that we have to talk about debriefing. Critical incident stress debrief requires facilitation of someone professional. So in your hospital system, a social worker, someone that's trained. We have critical incident response teams in place in our county for our EMS, for our helicopter. We have crews that are, or individuals that are trained on crews to manage those. And we keep a psychologist on staff just because of the high risk nature of our jobs and what we do. And she sees our families as well. But this is something that has to be more than just a brain dump diffusion of what happened. And again, we don't really talk about feelings here, but we talk about the situation, and it's guided and led so that it doesn't, it's not damaging to the people around. So this is the part where I tell you a little secret. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite. I'm an advocate for this. I teach this. I train people in it. And this past September, I did it all really wrong. I was called to the scene of a little boy who, we were called for a wilderness rescue, which meant we were going to hoist like we did there. But we got there and realized that we could land safely, so we opted to do that. There was CPR in progress of a 7-year-old little boy. An ATV had rolled over and landed on his chest. I didn't see anything. I have a blonde, little tan little girl who likes to play in the mud. And I didn't see anything approaching but the top of that little blonde head and those little toes. And I stopped becoming a clinician, and muscle memory took over. And he had been down from anywhere between 15 minutes and 60 minutes. So there was discussion about whether or not we should transport, and I didn't care. I was already placing an airway. I was already starting blood. Bilateral IOs. Got the airway in. Let's go. We're ready to go. CPR in progress. We're going to the hospital. There was no clinical decision making. There was no, he's certainly brain dead. There was nothing. It was just move. I became his mom in that moment. We got him to the hospital. We got pulses back. We got report. He went to CT. His brain was mush. 3 days later, they withdrew, well, he was ready to herniate. They withdrew care. He donated 3 organs. However, the entire way back, all I could think was, what have I done? I've just prolonged this life for this family. I've just made this experience horrific. Now they're going to have to take him off of life support. What have I done, you selfish, selfish girl? What have you done? And I struggled. Really, really struggled. I waited for the ED doc to come back from CT and say, what did I do, guys? Was I wrong? And he said, psh, adults, forget it. Kids, you bring them to me every single time. I don't care how long they were down. You bring them because we have the resources for the families. And he was right, but it didn't matter. I had already had that response and that reaction where I had to leave and go vomit. It was an immediate fight or flight, an acute stress reaction. It was awful. My partner called our helicopter out of service, and he said, what do you need? And I said, I just need a minute. So I took my minute. And then we went home, and that was my last shift for the week because I was leaving the next day to give a lecture at EMS World and take my mom to Vegas for her birthday. So I did none of this. I didn't debrief, I didn't diffuse, I did nothing, and I knew that I was a train wreck. I take care of pediatric trauma patients on a daily basis, but this kid wrecked my world, and I didn't see it. It lingered, it bothered me. I found myself Googling his family. I wanted to know what I had done. I still felt this immense amount of guilt, and I'm not particularly religious, but I prayed. I prayed for forgiveness. I prayed that they would find peace and that there wasn't pain. And I didn't recognize that while I was doing all of those things that I was struggling until the people in my life said, hey, you're being a real asshole. You're short, you have a short temper, you're not focused, you're distant, you're distracted, and they were absolutely right. So upon reflection, I was able to recognize that I missed the steps. I missed the important piece. I missed the opportunity to say to my partner and to the docs and to the teams there and to the nurse that rolled her eyes to say what happened, to tell our side of the story. I missed that opportunity to debrief that or to diffuse that. So it takes one person. It took in my case, 3, who relatively simultaneously said, how do I help? So I hope that eventually at some point in your career when you recognize that, whether you recognize it in yourself or you recognize it in others, that you can be that person that says, how can I help? Because to that person, you're going to mean the world. With that, thank you for your time.